Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to r/MaliciousCompliance, where people follow exact orders to spite someone. And in today's episode, it's a super satisfying one, where workers are fighting back against their nightmare Karen bosses, guys. And one OP tells a story about the time a smug CEO's daughter thought she was the big boss, and she gets taught a lesson she won't forget. I hope you enjoy the stories today. Hit subscribe if you're not subscribed, and as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. So when this happened, I was working IT for Safeway Corporate. Throughout the day, employees can submit for tech support by either calling the number or sending an email. As we were mostly a call center, the emails, called web tickets, would back up as everyone was busy on the phone. They would nominate a few agents to jump off the phones and call out on these emails we got. The average person would do 20 to 40 by the end of their shift. That said, I got assigned to a special group, assisting other tech specialists with telephony engineering issues. We needed someone to work the night shift to help the night guys. I gladly volunteered. We got maybe 3 calls a night, and that was for general tech support. I helped with maybe one thing a week. That's when my manager asked why I wasn't very busy at night. I told him all the stores are closed except those in Hawaii, and we don't have the same volume of calls. He then tells me that he wants to see me work web tickets at night. I work a few web tickets from 10 to 11 when I show up, and a few more from 5 to 6, but I don't have much success as night and morning stock crews want to put product on the shelves, not reboot a printer that's probably already working just fine. My manager then calls me in, and he's saying that everyone works significantly more web tickets than I do, and he wants to see my numbers go up. That's when I explained to him that the majority of the tickets are for stores that are closed, or for our corporate office in California where executives are sleeping. He said he doesn't want excuses, just get the numbers up. So that night, I call all 200 tickets. It isn't difficult, and it doesn't take long because no one answers. And I leave the typical voicemail explaining why I called and to please give us a call back. The next morning, my manager calls me in furious. Apparently, the high-level executives called my manager personally, wanting to know why they were getting woken up in the middle of the night by tech support. My manager asked me, "Did you call these people just to prove a point?" Now, I could have said many things, like just following orders, sir. Just doing my job, sir. What did you expect, sir? Instead, I simply replied, "Yep." And his reply was, "Well played." He no longer expected me to do web tickets at night. You know what? A manager owning up to their mistake is very rare, and honestly, OP deserves this malicious compliance win so much. Well played indeed. That said though, I wonder if the manager owned it because the manager's also trying to prove a point to his bosses. This person comments, "My boss does this sort of stuff a lot when he disagrees with policies. He sounds a little tyrant-y to us, the lower guys, but he's basically been told, make sure X is being done this way exactly. So he makes sure we do it that way exactly. The idea being when something fails, he knows we all did X exactly as mandated. Then he has some ammunition to turn it around and say, corporate guy said we must do X this way. Maybe with an I told him this would happen in this email. This is something that happened with my uncle during the early 2000s in South Korea. So my uncle was in an upper division head for a company that he was working for. He practically did most of the heavy lifting, so he was considered a valuable asset to the company. Everyone loved him and he was paid very well. What everyone loved about him the most was that he tried to get along with everyone in the building, and I mean everyone. From the interns who just started, to the ladies at the front desk, and even all the way to the janitorial ladies. He always made sure to greet and chat with them, and always made them feel like they belonged. And trust me, this is important later. That's when in came Mi Jin, the Karen of our story. She was a 25-year-old woman who was the new staff to join the company. Right off the bat, she was placed a few ranks above my uncle. He was rather annoyed that a younger person was giving him orders, but he had a family to take care of, so he decided to play along. At first, she wasn't all that bad. She finished with a master's in business, and she had plenty of internship experience, so her skills and tactics did help the company quite a lot. My uncle began to like her. That's until she dropped the bombshell of a policy. Apparently, she didn't like the fact that the office workers were sharing the lunch cafeteria with the janitorial staff. So she made a new policy that janitors aren't allowed lunch. And by that, she didn't mean they couldn't use the cafeteria. She was literally taking away their lunch break. She orders my uncle to be the one to break the news. Now, my uncle did not like this, so he contested every single time she brought this up. It finally got to the point where she revealed how she had the audacity to make such a policy. She revealed herself to be the daughter of the CEO of the company. And she said, as my uncle quoted, "If you don't like my new policy, then take it up with my dad, the CEO. I can ruin your life in an instant. And this is just a taste of what's to come once I inherit the company and become the new CEO." This is when my uncle had enough and began to meticulously plan her downfall. When he first told the new policy to the janitor staff, they were of course pissed. He assured them that he'll set this straight, and told them all they had to do was make their voices heard, and then gave them a few ideas. For the next few days, they went on strike, letting everyone know how underpaid they are and starved they were while working there. My uncle admits that the strike released all the built-up frustration, and the things that came out of the janitor crew were a bit more than he asked for. Some he wasn't even aware of and shocked to hear about. Mistreatment that was going on behind his back, office folks leaving too much of a mess everywhere, the underpay, the physical pains, the long hours, etc. A few of them my uncle was aware of, but not to the extent the janitor team described. Not soon after, due to all the commotion that started, the CEO got involved. He put a lot of effort into negotiating and calming them down. Before the Korean version of the Department of Labor got involved with the lawsuit, he promised that they would be treated better and paid better. When the dust settled, he then demanded to know who was the one that implemented the policy in the first place to cause all of this. That's when Mi-jin tried to coerce my uncle to take the fall. But he said that he just complied with what she said and took it to the CEO. He showed the new policy document signed by her, which even included the part about terminating anyone who spoke against the policy. At that, the CEO was pissed, and he was originally planning to fire his daughter. Apparently, he knew about her entitled nature for a very long time, but never expected it to impact so many people. His daughter begged to stay, and her dad allowed her to do so, at the cost of demotion from her current role and having no power over anyone in the company. Now, which role was she moved to, you may ask? She was moved to the trainee position of the janitorial team to learn that they too work very hard. And Dad even said to them, please don't go easy on her, be strict. She quit just after a week of her new role. I freaking love this malicious compliance so much, guys. And honestly, with reading so many stories where CEO dads power trip and side with their daughter, it's actually refreshing to hear of a CEO dad not taking their daughter's side. And in this case, even demoting her to janitor to teach her a much needed lesson about respecting others, and I love it. That's a great way to knock your self-entitled kid down a few pegs. So I used to work for a rainforest-named company several years ago that primarily focused on shipping and delivering packages and orders from their customers online. Specifically, I worked at one of the warehouses that was the last stop for packages that were then to be loaded into those blue vans that bring your stuff to your front door. Big trucks would unload packages throughout the night to be sorted and prepped by the workers. And then the full bags of packages would be loaded onto vans in the morning to be delivered by the drivers to houses. The system repeated every single day, with only 2, sometimes 3 shifts of workers. And as luck would have it, I was happily placed on night shift. The work was simple, if not exhausting, and being at night meant we didn't have to worry about the heat as much as day shift. Now, I won't go deep into detail about how every job worked, but I'll try to give enough detail to help give you a good idea of what happened. After the usual new hire period, where I was just trying to find my groove and get used to the hustle and bustle of the warehouse, I found myself assigned to one of the night jobs that was unanimously described as the most difficult job there. And honestly, I completely agree with that. The packages would be unloaded from the trucks on the conveyor belt, and they would then need to be pushed to one side of it or the other, depending on which side of the building they'd need to be going to. The packages would have a sticker with the letter A to Z, followed by other indicators for where it needs to go later, the letter determining which aisle it's supposed to be in, and in turn, which half of the building it would need to be on, based on where that aisle was compared to the belt. With me so far, good. Now, if standing beside the belt and pushing and pulling boxes and paper packages for several hours based on a letter sounds like an easy job, congratulations. You would be placed across from me to get your brain melted by the pace we had to work at. Imagine, if you will, a rhythm-based video game set to high difficulty, and then replace the buttons or notes with packages of different sizes. That would be a fairly close representation of what you'd be staring at, not for a few minutes, but for several hours. Things would get so overwhelming that some workers would give up halfway through the night, after getting too dizzy from having the rollers of the belt spinning in their vision for too long. The nights were even harder when the holidays came around, and the belt would be absolutely packed with boxes falling off the side on a regular. But then, you would look up across the belt, weary from the never-ending monsoon of labels and letters, and you would see me, listening to my nearby music and moving packages around like I had 2 extra arms and was some kind of splitting god. Now, I will admit, it did take a while to get used to the flow when I first started, and it did put a bit of strain on the eyes. But I would honestly just shut my brain off and let my eyes become unfocused as I just autopiloted the job like a madman. And here's the thing. No one ever did better than me at this job during my time there. And that's not my words, that's everyone who's ever tried to replace me from that spot. Like when our unwitting antagonist of this story finally enters, a manager from day shift who we'll call Sam. Now, occasionally, managers would switch around from the different shifts to make sure they knew how the place functioned properly, which was cool, no problem. I got in for my shift on the night that Sam was supposed to manage our shift for once. I give the usual hellos and ironic good mornings to everyone, preparing for the night shift, and then went to the job board. Everyone got assigned the job they would do that night as they came in, and since I was usually one of the first ones there, I would just say hi to the night manager as I moved my own name to the splitter position, as we both knew that was my spot. This night, however, I went through those same motions. I say hi to Sam, place my name tag on the splitter, and then went to go prepare the split zone for my day. A few minutes later, I get called over to the job board. That's when Sam says to me, "So hey, I just want to let you know that I moved you to Section A for the night. You don't work splitter today, so go ahead and get a scanner set up and head on over." I was confused, and I say to him, "But what about the splitting?" Sam tells me, "Don't worry, we have it covered. We just need you over in A." At this point, I had set up my place at the split zone, so I could handle it at my best, and he was moving some stuff away so he could do whatever he was doing for the night. I was a bit confused as the package count was higher than average that night, and a good splitter really takes a load off of all the other jobs down the line. Me, with a serious face, say, are you sure you want to do this?" Sam, confused, says, "Do what? I told you to grab a scanner and go over there." That's when I say, "Are you sure you don't want me up here? It's supposed to get really busy tonight." At this, he waves me off and he says, "We'll be fine. If it gets too busy, one of us managers will jump in to help." When he said that, I actually chuckled aloud briefly, and I shook my head. I had seen the managers split before, and none of them would last a whole night shift if they had to do it. Very few could, and I was unrivaled at the job, so I knew what was about to happen. At this point, The first trucks had already pulled in, and they looked really beefy to start with. I did some rough estimation, and I say to Sam, "Alright, I'll give you 15 minutes. Sam says, "Huh? 15 minutes for what?" I say to him, "You'll see. I gotta go get a scanner now. There's not much time before the belt starts, and I have to get ready again." He actually seemed confused as I walked off to get ready for my new job. Now, I was a bit bummed in all honesty because splitting was my favorite job, with how I could just shut off for a bit while doing it, kind of like being in a trance or meditating, but the man said what the man said. Once the belt started, I went along doing my job, scanning and placing packages in bags. There was not much to say, other than it was slow and boring, but I kept an eye on my watch. Sure enough, barely 10 minutes pass when one of the lane supervisors, who we'll call Amber, enters my lane. Amber says, "Hey, OP." I smile and say, "They need me up front, don't they?" Amber, also smiling, says, "Yep, they just radioed it in. I'm here to take over until they get a replacement here." I then check my watch and I say, "I'm 5 minutes ahead of schedule too. It must be pretty bad." Amber says, "Yeah, they've already had to pull Jackpot back to the front twice." I say, "I guess I'll go save the day." Jackpot was a term that we used for any packages that reached the end of the belt without being sorted. They were put into large containers and they were wheeled back to the front to do the whole run again. I hand the scanner to her and I quickly made my way to the split zone, and it was absolute mayhem. I saw the poor replacement splitter and 2 managers, including Sam, trying to calm the monster that was this night's intake. Packages were falling off the belt, people were buried to their knees, and Sam looked like his eyes were about to explode with how wide they had gotten. I then take a deep breath, cracked my knuckles mid-stride as I moved to the front of the line. I say, "I've got this. Get those packages picked up and put into a jackpot. Sam, I'm gonna need those racks back over here once it's cleared up." I then say to the other splitter, "Please back up a bit and double check my work." There was absolutely zero room for debate, as everyone had no choice but to listen to what I had to say, and I begin to split the belt like I was conducting 3 orchestras at once. That 10 minutes I was gone took me another 20 to get things running smoothly again. Needless to say, I was thanked for the rescue, and I was told to stay there the rest of the night, much to my pleasure. Sam also proceeded to ensure that I was designated splitter every single night I was there to avoid further problems. They also started to include me in conversations on how to train new splitters for the nights I was out, and any advice to pass along from my own experiences. I guess it sometimes does pay to be so good at a job that no one can question you. There were still nights that they put me on other jobs, but it was usually the slower nights. I'd usually be called up if someone gave up or it got busy though, which I didn't mind too much, as long as we were clear that at the end of the night, that was my spot. Oh man, I can't even begin to imagine what would have happened if OP took this malicious compliance to the extreme and let the whole operation fail that night. That would have been evil. That said though, OP must have felt like a hero that night, and I'm glad Sam recognized what OP was saying when OP came back and basically gave him the good old "I told you so." But yeah, good on Sam for recognizing this terrible mistake and actually having the humility to admit that OP was right. Once again, rare boss right there. So about 20 years ago, I used to work as an office assistant at a small company where we'd receive orders from clients and then we'd assign the work to one of our freelancers who were well compensated and respectable professionals. My boss was such a professional herself, and when possible, we would assign that work to her. I accepted the minimum wage job because she told me that I could sometimes get tasks assigned as a freelancer with a nice freelancer compensation, and that she would personally train me, and that in less than a year, I would most likely get promoted to a regular freelancer, and I would make very good money. This sounded like a great career path to my young and naive ears. One of the things she had told me in the very beginning is that when you take over an order, you become like a project manager for the order. You need to make sure that the freelancer would finish the work on time, as the work was usually time sensitive. Additionally, she loved going on long lectures about how she's paying me minimum wage for me to use my brain and figure things out when necessary. These lectures were mainly a vehicle for her to stroke her own ego by explaining to her employees how our brains were not as smart as hers. One day, our biggest corporate client had placed a large order that was due on Monday by noon, and we had assigned the task to my boss to do over the weekend. It was Monday morning, time was ticking, and my boss hadn't arrived at the office. The client had called to see if we were going to provide the work soon, as it was urgent. I tried calling my boss, who didn't pick up her phone. I then called half an hour later and texted her. No answer or reply, while noon was fast approaching. So I call her landline at home. Her husband picks up the phone and told me that she wasn't home, and I explained very briefly why I was trying to get a hold of her. Well, less than an hour before noon, my boss calls furious that I had been so insistent on getting a hold of her that I created such a state of stress and emergency at her house. She yells at me so hard, saying her home number was only for emergencies, and this wasn't an emergency. She said to me, "It's not professional to call people when they're not at work. Never do it again." She told me she got everything under control, and she was now sending the work to the client directly. When she arrived at the office, she gives me a big scolding in person, and she told me that I do need to hound other freelancers, but not her, that it was her business and she got everything handled, that she knew all the clients and they were clients because of her. That's when she looks me in the eye and she told me, if I take over a task, it's not your task anymore, it's my task. You don't need to bother me with reminders. You just need to give me the instructions from the client and I'll handle everything myself. From that point on, your job is done. I never ever miss deadlines. If the client calls, you tell them I'm on it and you don't call or text me about it. Got it? When she said that, I thought, fair enough. I apologized for the stress and I repeated the new instructions back to her for confirmation. She was very happy with that and she confirmed that I understood everything. She then once more gave me her favorite lecture, how she was paying me minimum wage for me to use my brain, with a lot of condescending examples of how she always uses her brain unlike us normal workers. I could only nod along as if her narcissistic rant was actually teaching anybody anything. That said, about a month or so later, another client comes in with an order. I accepted it and my boss was available to handle it. So I forwarded everything to her and I considered my work in regard to that order done as instructed. On the day of the deadline, I was on vacation and I was hiking in a remote area with spotty cell coverage. The other office assistant had called me and told me the client called the office to check if the work was ready. That's when I told my colleague that our boss was on it and we didn't need to worry as our boss was going to handle it, and that my clear instructions were to tell the client that our boss was personally on it, that the task would be done by the deadline, and explicitly not to call our boss to remind her of the deadline. Then, since I was on vacation, I needed to conserve my battery. And since everything at the office was handled, I switched off my phone. Because my boss told me an approaching deadline that my boss had to meet was explicitly not an emergency. Also, I had recently realized that my boss had knowingly misled me about the career opportunities at this job. So I wasn't gonna be on call on my rare day off. While I was hiking without a care in the world, my boss had managed to forget about the deadline. By the time she realized she had missed it, the office was closed. My boss had urgently finished the work, but it turned out she didn't know the clients so well, as she didn't have their contact details. As the order was in the office and my phone was off, she had to go there herself, fetch it, and use the contact details to deliver the work late. This was particularly embarrassing as my colleague informed the client that our boss was personally doing the work for them. When I came back to work, it was pandemonium. She of course screamed at me, but I simply pointed out that everything I'd done was following her instructions. She basically said to me, "Why did you do this?" To which I responded, "You told me to." She was fuming, but she knew I was correct, and I had acted exactly as instructed. She also screamed at me for my phone being off, but I said I needed to conserve my battery for emergencies, and this was clearly not an emergency, and I'm not on call while on vacation anyways. Malicious compliance for the win, right? Well, narcissists never accept blame, and she had this idea of how to shift the blame to me after all. She then says to me, "But you didn't provide me with the client's contact details with the order assignment. How could I have delivered them the work? It was all your fault for not providing me with all the information." That's when I pointed out that she told me she knew all the clients personally. But if she had used her brain, like she's constantly telling us to, she could have easily noticed that the order instructions were on the client's letterhead, with all their contact details spelled out on every single page, bottom and top. That was a huge slap to her fragile ego, and remembering her face in the moment still makes me smile. Needless to say, I was fired, but of course I didn't mind. Don't you just love happy endings? Unlike other bosses in this story, this is one Karen boss that couldn't take what she was dishing out. And my guess is OP got fired for failing to cater to her to make her feel as special as she knew she was. Like, don't you just hate it when you recognize that a boss isn't as awesome as they think they are and get fired for it? But that's entitled Karen bosses for you. And seriously, her not realizing that all the contact details were part of the letterhead, frickin' chef's kiss right there. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of r/malicious compliance. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's an r/entitled People episode, where psycho Karen parents are crossing boundaries and the stories are absolutely wild. Guys, go check it out if you haven't, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.